The inevitable pushing baby during birth. I know, big gulp swallow, right? We all have to do it. But do we know how to do it? And more importantly, do we know how to do it in the most efficient of ways? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. How many of you have heard that when you go into labor and when it's time to push baby out of the birth canal, the birth team or the doctors often tell the woman to push like you're having a bowel movement? My belief is that this is the one cue that in that moment, our birth team has figured out works, right? It helps women understand, oh, I know how to push like I'm having a bowel movement, so I know how to push my baby out. But is it the safest way? Is it the most effective way? What I mean by the safest is that oftentimes if we don't push a bowel movement out correctly in everyday life, I know it's kind of weird, but I promise you it happens, then we're not going to push baby out of the birth canal in an effective way. And what can happen when we incorrectly push, whether in a bowel movement or during birth, is, you guessed it, that irregulation of pressure in the abdomen. But when we push correctly, both in a bowel movement and during birth, we can regulate that pressure and have it support our pelvic floor and core instead of hindering it. The effectiveness point is kind of in the same area, because if you effectively push, you're going to push quicker, and whatever that means for you. No pushing phase is meant to be 30 minutes or less, 1 hour, 2 hours. Everyone's birth story is different. So I just want you to make your pushing as effective as possible. If we think about bowel movements and pushing during birth, how many of you at home have heard of women coming out of their birth experience having hemorrhoids, having symptoms of incontinence, experiencing prolapse, and sometimes even feeling like they got diastasis recti in the pushing phase of birth? Yes, all of that can literally happen during the pushing phase of your birth when you push incorrectly. So let's go back to the bowel movements. Every time you have a bowel movement for the rest of your pregnancy or for the rest of your life, I want you to address your bowel movement and your pelvic floor and core in the same way that you will teach your body how to push your baby out of your birth canal. It's slightly different than the way that we activate the core in every other realm here at Studio Bloom. Because you always hear me and my coaches telling you to lift and wrap, whether we're doing squats and arm workouts, back workouts, booty workouts, or core specific moves. But when it comes to pushing, we have to shift it just a little bit, which probably makes sense to most of you. You can't imagine pushing a baby out of the birth canal while lifting your pelvic floor. It seems a little counterintuitive, right? So to shift your typical lift and wrap so that it is ready to push during a bowel movement and or during birth, you're going to think about using that wrapping ability of your core to help in assisting baby out of the birth canal. But here's the trick. You are going to lengthen your pelvic floor like you do on an inhale at the same time that you push. I know. What did you just say, Brooke? How does that even make sense? You're going to practice with your bowel movements, because during the bowel movements is when you will have these aha moments. I finally get what she's saying. If you just sit here and watch this video and try to wrap your core and relax your pelvic floor, you're just going to be really overwhelmed. So the next time you're having a bowel movement, I want you to think about gently We're not hugging the baby super, super tight or wrapping a corset around us super, super tight. It's a gentle wrapping. Remember, we're just trying to assist in the bowel movement and or the pushing during birth. So you're going to exhale just ever so slightly during your bowel movement and think about gently wrapping your core. At the same time, you're going to think about expelling the bowel movement, so you're going to lengthen through the pelvic floor muscles. I don't expect you to become a master of this the first handful of times you practice it, but it will get easier. I promise. You also may find that if you are having constipation issues, being able to address the way that you push during your bowel movements will also give you relief from your constipation. I know, all of these funny little side gifts that I give you guys, or that maybe it's actually you give yourself these gifts by applying the techniques that we teach you. So, reassessing the way that you push during your bowel movement is ultimately going to prepare you for your big day. I'll never forget looking at my birth photos several days after my birth and seeing one where I was clearly in a state of pushing. I had my doula on one side, my midwife on the other, and my husband was in the background. And I remember being in awe of how activated my core was in this photo. Because believe me, if you haven't experienced birth yet, you are in quite a fog and aren't so quick to remember all of these techniques that we teach. So it's important that you implement them now so that you strengthen that mind-body connection a little bit better so that you're more apt to just go there when it's time to push. So not to seem redundant, but to be able to learn how to push effectively during your birth, you're going to repattern the way that you push during your bowel movements. As you have your bowel movement, you are wrapping your core, you're releasing the pelvic floor. This can all be done on your exhale. It also doesn't have to be done on the exhale, but oftentimes our inhales and exhales can help lead us in the direction that we're trying to go. As always, be patient. Know that you're learning a new technique and go with it. Maybe laugh along the way. Ultimately, we just want you to be able to know how to push, to understand it a little bit better than you may have before this video. Don't be too hard on yourself. You don't have to master this before your birth happens. Either way, you are going to push beautifully, mama, and your baby will arrive safe and sound. But if you want to practice, this is what you're going to do.